Let me be satisfactorily clear. What happened on November 21st, 2025 was not just another resignation from Congress. This was the moment the entire facade began to crumble. This was the moment when one of Donald Trump's most loyal soldiers looked him in the eye and said, "Enough is enough." And what she revealed in those final moments should concern every single American who believes in truth, justice, and accountability. Marjorie Taylor Greene, the woman who fought harder for Donald Trump than almost anyone in Congress, the woman who left her mother's side while her father was in brain surgery to vote against Trump's impeachment, the woman who wore MAGA hats to State of the Union addresses and built her entire political identity around defending this president, that woman just walked away, and she didn't walk away quietly. She walked away with a message that should send chills down the spine of everyone who thought they understood what was happening in Washington. But here's what most people don't realize. This isn't just about one congresswoman leaving office. This is about what she was willing to sacrifice everything for. This is about the Epstein files. This is about the names that powerful people desperately want to keep hidden. And this is about a president who will destroy anyone, even his most devoted allies, to keep those secrets buried. Before I continue, I want you to understand something. What I'm about to tell you connects dots that the mainstream media has been too afraid to connect. It reveals a pattern of behavior that goes beyond politics, beyond party loyalty, beyond anything we've seen in modern American history. And it all started with a simple question that Marjorie Taylor Greene refused to stop asking. Where are the Epstein files? Now, let me take you back to understand how we got here. For months, Greene had been pushing for something that Donald Trump promised on the campaign trail: full transparency, complete release of all documents related to Jeffrey Epstein, the convicted sex trafficker who died in a Manhattan jail cell in 2019 while awaiting trial. The man whose connections reached into the highest levels of power across the globe. Trump himself stood before rallies of thousands and promised his supporters that he would release everything. He made it a cornerstone of his campaign. He told the American people they deserved to know the truth. But something changed when he actually took office. The promises became excuses. The transparency became obstruction. And anyone who pushed too hard found themselves suddenly on the outside. Greene was not supposed to be one of those people. She had given everything to this movement. She had endured being stripped of her committee assignments. She had weathered accusations of promoting conspiracy theories. She had stood by Trump when others abandoned him. But when she started demanding that he keep his promise about the Epstein files, everything changed. And what happened next reveals more about the nature of power in Washington than any political scandal in recent memory. Let me tell you exactly what Greene did that made her a target. In recent weeks, she joined a small group of Republicans and Democrats who forced a vote on the House floor to compel the Department of Justice to release its full investigative files on Jeffrey Epstein. This wasn't a partisan attack. This was members of Congress from both parties saying the American people have a right to know. The bill demanded that Attorney General Pam Bondi release everything, every document, every interview transcript, every piece of evidence collected over years of federal investigations, every internal communication about why certain people were never charged. Every immunity deal, every sealed settlement, everything. And here's what's crucial to understand. Before this bill gained momentum, the Trump administration had been slow-walking the release of any meaningful information. They released flight logs that were already public. They released redacted contact books that told us nothing new. They held press conferences where conservative influencers carried binders, labeled Epstein Files Phase 1 that contained documents anyone could have found online. It was theater. It was performance. It was anything but the transparency Trump had promised. Greene saw through it, and she refused to stay silent. When Greene signed onto the discharge petition to force a vote on the Epstein files, Trump's response was immediate and vicious. He called her Marjorie Traitor Greene. He told reporters something happened to her where she changed politically. He withdrew his endorsement and said he would support anyone who challenged her in a primary. Think about what that means. A president of the United States publicly attacking a member of his own party, one of his most loyal defenders, for the crime of demanding that he keep a campaign promise, for the crime of standing with survivors of sexual abuse who want answers, for the crime of believing that transparency should mean something. But here's what makes this even more disturbing. In her resignation statement, Greene said something that should make every American stop and think. She said, standing up for American women who were raped at 14, trafficked, and used by rich, powerful men should not result in me being called a traitor and threatened by the President of the United States, whom I fought for. Read those words again. Raped at 14, trafficked and used by rich, powerful men. This is what Marjorie Taylor Greene was fighting for. This is why Donald Trump turned on her. This is why he branded one of his most devoted supporters a traitor. Not because she betrayed him, but because she refused to betray the victims. Now, I want you to understand the timeline of what happened, because the sequence of events tells a story that the administration desperately wants you to ignore. On November 12th, the House Oversight Committee released over 20,000 pages of documents from Jeffrey Epstein's estate. These were not government files. These were personal records, emails, correspondence that had been subpoenaed as part of a congressional investigation. And buried in those documents were emails that mentioned Donald Trump. In one email from 2011, Epstein wrote to Ghislaine Maxwell, the woman now serving 20 years in prison for sex trafficking, and said, quote, "I want you to realize that that dog that hasn't barked is Trump." The email referenced a redacted victim who allegedly spent hours with Trump at Epstein's home. When asked about these emails, the White House press secretary said they prove absolutely nothing other than the fact that President Trump did nothing wrong. But if that's true, if there's nothing to hide, then why did Trump spend months fighting against the release of these documents? Why did he attack members of his own party who wanted transparency? Why did he threaten and demean a congresswoman who simply wanted to keep his campaign promise? The answer became clearer on November 18th when something remarkable happened. The bill to release the Epstein files came to a vote in the House of Representatives, and it passed 427 to 1. 427 members of Congress, Republicans and Democrats, voted to force the Department of Justice to release everything it has on Jeffrey Epstein. Only one member voted no. The Senate passed it by unanimous consent. And Trump, facing overwhelming bipartisan pressure and the prospect of looking like he was hiding something, signed the bill into law. But even as he signed it, he couldn't help himself. He posted on social media that Democrats were using the Epstein issue to distract from what he called his amazing victories. He claimed the issue affects Democrats far more than the Republican Party. He tried to make himself the victim, even as he was being forced to do what he should have done months ago. And here's what you need to understand about what comes next. The Department of Justice now has 30 days to release everything, every investigative file, every interview transcript, every piece of evidence. But there are already signs that the administration may try to find ways around this requirement. The bill allows the Justice Department to withhold information related to active investigations. And just days before Trump signed this bill, Attorney General Pam Bondi ordered a federal prosecutor to open investigations into some of the people named in Epstein's communications. Do you see what's happening? They're potentially using the very mechanism of justice to shield information from the public. They're opening investigations not to prosecute crimes, but to justify keeping secrets. Marjorie Taylor Greene saw this coming. On the day before she resigned, she said publicly that the administration's compliance with the bill would be its real test. She asked the question that every American should be asking: will the Department of Justice release the files, or will it all remain tied up in investigations? She knew what was possible. She knew the games that could be played, and she was willing to sacrifice her political career to make sure the American people were watching. But Greene's resignation wasn't just about the Epstein files. It was about a fundamental betrayal that goes to the heart of what the MAGA movement was supposed to represent. In her 11-minute video statement, Greene laid bare a truth that many of her former allies don't want to hear. She said she had always represented the common American man and woman. She said that's why she's been despised in Washington and never fit in. And then she said something that should resonate with everyone who has ever felt used by the powerful. She said loyalty should be a two-way street. Think about what it took for Marjorie Taylor Greene to say those words. This is a woman who defined herself through her loyalty to Donald Trump. This is a woman who endured years of attacks, who sacrificed relationships, who made herself one of the most controversial figures in American politics, all in service of a man and a movement she believed in. And in the end, when she dared to prioritize the victims of sexual trafficking over the political convenience of the president, she was cast aside like she never mattered at all. But here's what makes this moment even more significant. Greene's resignation came at the same time that Trump was escalating his rhetoric against other members of Congress in ways that should alarm every American. On November 20th, the day before Greene announced she was leaving, Trump posted on social media calling 6 Democratic members of Congress traitors who should be arrested and put on trial for seditious behavior. His exact words were seditious behavior punishable by death. Let me say that again. The President of the United States suggested that members of Congress should face the death penalty. And what was their crime? They released a video reminding members of the military that they have the right, and in some cases the duty, to refuse illegal orders. These weren't random activists. These were veterans. These were former intelligence officials. These were people who served their country and understand what the Constitution actually requires. Senator Alyssa Slotkin served at the CIA and the Defense Department. Representative Jason Crow served in Iraq and Afghanistan. Representative Chrissy Houlihan served in the Air Force. They weren't calling for insurrection. They were reminding service members of a principle that has been fundamental to the American military since its founding. You follow lawful orders, you refuse unlawful ones. And for that simple statement of constitutional principle, The president said they should be executed. The response was immediate and terrifying. Within hours of Trump's post, bomb threats were called into the homes and offices of the lawmakers he targeted. Senator Slotkin's home in Michigan received a bomb threat. The offices of Representatives Deluzio, Houlihan, and Crow were evacuated. Capitol Police placed multiple members of Congress under 24-hour protection. This is not normal. This is not acceptable. This is a president of the United States using his platform to paint targets on the backs of people who disagree with him. And when asked about it the next day, Trump said he wasn't threatening death. He said in the old days that was punishable by death. He said he thinks they're in serious trouble. He didn't apologize. He didn't acknowledge that his words had consequences. He doubled down while his followers were calling in bomb threats to the people he had named. Connect these dots. A president who attacks anyone who pushes for transparency on the Epstein files. A president who suggests execution for lawmakers who remind the military of constitutional principles. A president who turns on his most loyal supporters the moment they prioritize victims over his political interests. This is not about ideology. This is not about conservative versus liberal. This is about power and about what a man will do to keep it. Representative Jasmine Crockett said it perfectly in her response to Greene's resignation. She said Trump only knows how to use people up and then cast them aside when he's done. He did it to his VP. He did it to those who wanted the Epstein files. He did it to those who believed he cared about their struggles. And now he's doing it to one of his most loyal followers. That pattern is undeniable. Steve Bannon, who helped build the movement, has been marginalized. Michael Cohen, who was once Trump's fixer, went to prison while Trump walked free. Rudy Giuliani, who stood by Trump through multiple impeachments, saw his life destroyed. And now Marjorie Taylor Greene, who gave everything to the cause, has been branded a traitor for the crime of caring about trafficking victims. But something is different this time. Greene isn't going quietly. In her resignation statement, she suggested that Republicans will likely lose the midterms. She implied that Trump will be impeached when Democrats regain control of the House. She positioned herself not as a defeated ally, but as someone who sees clearly what others refuse to acknowledge. Representative Ro Khanna, a Democrat who worked with Greene on the Epstein files legislation, said something remarkable. He said it wouldn't surprise him if Greene runs for president in 2028. He said she has more populist instincts than J.D. Vance. He said she's more in touch with the populism that fueled Trump's rise than Trump and Vance are today. Think about what that means. A Democrat saying that Marjorie Taylor Greene might be the future of the Republican Party because she cared enough about ordinary people to sacrifice her relationship with Donald Trump. Now here's what happens next and why everyone needs to pay attention. The Epstein files are supposed to be released within 30 days. That means before Christmas, the American people should finally see what the Department of Justice has been holding. We should see the evidence from multiple federal investigations. We should see the interview transcripts. We should see the internal communications about why certain people were never charged. We should see who was protected and why. But there are reasons to be skeptical. Attorney General Pam Bondi has consistently resisted transparency on this issue. When she appeared before Congress, she refused to answer questions about the Epstein files and redirected criticism toward Democrats. When asked about the new legislation, she said only that the department would follow the law with maximum transparency while protecting victims. Notice that phrase, while protecting victims. Of course, victims should be protected. Their identities should remain confidential, but that language can also be used to justify withholding information that has nothing to do with protecting victims. It can be used to hide evidence of powerful people who abuse their positions. It can be weaponized to keep the most important secrets buried while claiming to comply with the law. The legislation does include some exemptions. The Department of Justice can withhold personally identifiable information about victims. It can withhold child sexual abuse materials. It can withhold information deemed classified for national defense or foreign policy. And crucially, it can withhold information that would jeopardize active investigations or prosecutions. That last exemption is where the games will be played. If the administration opens investigations into people named in the Epstein files, they can argue that releasing information would compromise those investigations. They can keep documents sealed indefinitely while claiming they're pursuing justice. They can turn the demand for transparency into a justification for more secrecy. Greene warned about this. Victims' advocates have warned about this. Members of Congress from both parties have warned about this. The question now is whether the American people will hold the administration accountable or whether they'll accept another round of theater and performance while the real documents stay hidden. Let me tell you what we already know from the documents that have been released. Jeffrey Epstein maintained relationships with powerful people long after he became a registered sex offender. His emails show him giving advice to Steve Bannon about building political movements in Europe. They show Larry Summers, the former Treasury Secretary and Harvard president, asking Epstein for romantic advice and making jokes about women's intelligence. They show communications with academics, business leaders, politicians from both parties. The Epstein network wasn't partisan. It crossed every line. And that's exactly why full transparency is so important and why certain people are so desperate to prevent it. When the full files are released, we may learn things that implicate people we thought we knew. We may discover that the corruption goes deeper than anyone imagined. We may find out that the systems we trusted to protect children failed in ways that were not accidental but deliberate. Or we may find out that some of the speculation was wrong, that some of the names that have been whispered were innocent, that the conspiracy theories went too far. Either way, the American people deserve to know. That's what Marjorie Taylor Greene was fighting for. That's why she sacrificed her political career. That's why she stood with survivors who were raped at 14 and told them she would not abandon them, even if it meant being called a traitor by the president she once defended. The American people are paying attention. A CNN poll found that half the country is dissatisfied with the information the government has released about the Epstein case. They want answers. They want transparency. They want to know who was involved and who was protected. And they're watching to see whether this administration will finally deliver what Trump promised or whether the games will continue. Marjorie Taylor Greene's resignation is a warning. It's a warning about what happens when loyalty is demanded but never returned. It's a warning about what happens when a movement built on fighting for ordinary people becomes captured by those who only want to protect themselves. It's a warning about what happens when truth becomes inconvenient for those in power. But it's also a moment of possibility. Greene's departure creates a special election in Georgia. It reduces the Republican majority in the House to its thinnest margin yet. It raises questions about whether other Republicans will find the courage to speak out. It opens a conversation about what the MAGA movement actually stands for and whether it can survive this moment of fracture. Greene said in her statement that if she is cast aside by MAGA Inc., and replaced by neocons, big pharma, big tech, the military-industrial war complex, foreign leaders, and the elite donor class that can't even relate to real Americans, then many common Americans have been cast aside and replaced as well. Those are extraordinary words coming from someone who was once the face of the movement. They suggest that Greene sees something her former allies don't want to acknowledge, that the movement has been captured, that the promises have been broken, that the people who were supposed to be fighting for working families are now serving the very elites they claim to oppose. Whether you agree with Marjorie Taylor Greene's politics or not, whether you supported her or opposed her, this moment demands attention. Because what's happening isn't just about one congresswoman or one political party. It's about whether the systems that are supposed to protect us can still function. It's about whether transparency means anything when power decides it's inconvenient. It's about whether victims of the most horrific crimes will ever see justice or whether the powerful will continue to protect their own. The next 30 days will tell us a lot. We'll see whether the Department of Justice complies with the law or finds ways to obstruct it. We'll see whether the names that have been protected finally come to light. We'll see whether the American people demand accountability or accept another round of excuses. And we'll see whether Marjorie Taylor Greene's sacrifice meant something or whether it was just another casualty in a system designed to crush anyone who challenges the powerful. I know what I believe. I believe that transparency is not negotiable. I believe that victims deserve justice, regardless of who the perpetrators are. I believe that no president is above the law, and no loyalty should be above the truth. And I believe that what Marjorie Taylor Greene did, standing with survivors, even when it cost her everything, showed more courage than most politicians will ever demonstrate in their entire careers. The question now is what the rest of us will do with this moment. Will we pay attention? Will we demand answers? Will we hold power accountable? Or will we let this story fade into the background noise of another news cycle while the secrets stay buried and the powerful stay protected? The choice is ours, and the clock is ticking.